Imagine this. The screen fades in from black. You see bubbles rise from a tank inside a secret laboratory. You see a being awake for the first time ever and become aware of its consciousness. There is a POV shot of this being looking out of the tank, surrounded by shadowy silhouettes of people in this laboratory, confused and alone. Then when we see the outside of this tank, we get a look at the being itself, with wires and tubes connected to it in various places, giving off an air of mystery. The creature breaks out of the tanks, and the laboratory is surrounded by darkness and shadows. In his confusion and anger at being a tool solely for the benefit of his human masters, he kills everybody there and destroys the laboratory. This, as I'm sure you've already guessed by now, is the opening scene to Pokemon the first movie. And what an opening it is. On its own, it's probably the best part of the movie, and is without flaw. Now, while the film itself isn't very good, in fact parts of it are downright awful, the atmosphere this film is able to establish is breathtakingly incredible. Believe it or not, Pokemon is the most profitable entertainment franchise ever, with a total gross of $92 billion since 1996 when the first game came out. This is through various games, shows, movies, books, and merchandising throughout the years. That's right, Pokemon is more financially successful than Marvel, Disney, Pixar, and even Star Wars. Now, nothing screams allergic to women more than talking about Pokemon for 10 minutes. Nevertheless, I do think Pokemon the first movie is worthy of discussion. Anyway, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please consider subscribing before we get into the video. Thanks, I appreciate it. Over the course of its existence, the Pokemon Company has released 24 films, but while many of these films aren't very good, many of them in fact are terrible, especially when one takes off their nostalgia goggles, Pokemon the first movie stands out as one of the better examples of the bunch, as well as being the best remembered to this day, with maybe the only exception being Detective Pikachu, which came out just a couple of years ago now. And while the plot of Pokemon the first movie isn't anything to write home about, the film does have some strengths that make it well worth the watch in my opinion. Its animation is gorgeous, the soundtrack's great, and supposedly even the story is well written if you watch the Japanese version. The English version that we all remember apparently was butchered and rewrote to hell to be almost an entirely different film following an almost completely different plot. But you'll have to take this one with a grain of salt, as I myself have not personally seen the Japanese version and only have read as much online. But regardless, what I firmly believe to be Pokemon the movie's greatest aspect is its atmosphere. Recently I rewatched this film for the first time in over a decade, and have to say, not only does the atmosphere that it showcases make it a standout among Pokemon films, but a standout among films in general. The mood this film sets is chilling and mysterious. The majority of the film takes place during an unending thunderstorm on a dark island in the middle of the sea. Throughout the whole film, the viewer is constantly reminded of a growing danger. The mysterious dark island in the middle of nowhere aspect reminds me a lot of Beauty and the Beast, another animated film with great atmosphere. In that film, you have a dark enchanted castle in the middle of nowhere, and while Mewtwo's island is not exactly enchanted by magic, it is all by his design. It draws people to it because Mewtwo used his powers to make it that way. Mewtwo creates all the circumstances surrounding the island, such as the building on it, the storm that makes traveling to it difficult, the hypnotized woman who works as the mysterious host of the guests that arrive. Both of these settings are executed this way to give the viewer a sense of isolation. But while Beauty and the Beast uses this mood of isolation to tell a cheery and lighthearted story, Pokemon the first movie uses this mood to serve a darker story. Mewtwo is a Pokemon created in a lab who is a genetically modified clone of an ancient Pokemon named Mew. Mewtwo is surrounded by mystery. How is the laboratory able to create him? What nefarious purpose was he created for? Don't expect a straight answer on this, as the film only alludes to what the intended use of Mewtwo would have been under his human masters. And Mewtwo plans to wipe out the entire planet and rebuild society with what he believes is a superior civilization, which for a kid's film is pretty dark stuff. But as viewers, we don't learn this right away, further adding a layer of mystery to the plot. Why does Mewtwo make his home in the ruins of the laboratory he was created in? Why does he call all these people to his domain? Why does he make it so difficult for his invited guests to reach him? This sense of mystery is well portrayed throughout the film. The tone of the film, for the most part, represents all these feelings perfectly. The isolation, the feeling of urgency, the mystery. It all works together to create an atmosphere that, even with a poorly executed story, is just incredible. On a side note, even the scenes that don't actively work to create this tone have great atmosphere, such as when the storm begins towards the start of the film and all the Pokemon trainers are shut in at a rest stop. We hear chattering, see restless people, and just an all-around sense of anxiousness to get back outside. I think we all have a memory of something similar to this scene happening in our own lives, and it just goes to show how realistically this film can portray its mood when it wants to. But one scene in the film that I think shows the complexity and greatness of the film's atmosphere perfectly is the scene where Team Rocket is in the basement lab of Mewtwo's gloomy castle. Now, Team Rocket really only serve one purpose in this film, and they don't really do anything important to the story, but rather act as surrogates for the viewer. They're the most ignorant to what's going on in the plot of the movie, just as we are watching it for the first time. When Team Rocket are in the basement laboratory, they're confused, they're isolated, and they sense the danger of this place. In this one scene, Team Rocket feels all the same emotions the viewers are made to feel by this film's mood. In fact, when I was rewatching the movie, this scene in particular is what got me thinking more about the atmosphere of the film, and the components it breaks down into. Now you're probably thinking, well, what good does a great atmosphere do if this film is terrible? You even said so yourself earlier in the video. And while you're right, the film isn't very good, and while I think its accomplishment in the mood department is great enough to warrant discussion on its own, there is one scene in this film that all the build-up atmosphere works to create the film's most emotionally impactful moment. You know the scene I'm talking about, the infamous Ash turn to stone scene. I never met a person who didn't cry watching this scene. At the height of the film's climax, right after the original Mew shows up during the battle between the main character's Pokemon and Mewtwo's superior clone Pokemon, which on its own is a pretty sad scene as well, Ash jumps in between Mew and Mewtwo's battle and sacrifices himself in an attempt to end the fighting, resulting, of course, in him being turned to stone. This scene is truly heartbreaking. Pikachu trying desperately to revive Ash and the Pokemon all crying around him. It's really touching. Mewtwo changes his course because of this selfless act. Even the cold-hearted Mewtwo changes his mind, he is so touched by this sacrifice. This scene, I would argue, is only given the elevation and emotional impact it has because of the atmosphere that has been built up to this point. As viewers, we are feeling the same things Ash does at this moment. The film has made us feel isolated, made us feel the danger. We know that if someone doesn't do something to stop Mewtwo soon, it will be too late. And Ash does too. If the audience didn't understand these things, this scene wouldn't carry nearly as much weight. But as viewers, we don't understand these things because the film tells us to, but rather because of the mood and tonal depth the film so greatly executes. It would take an extraordinary amount of bravery for anyone in a situation like that to do what Ash did. This very scene is the reason this movie is remembered over all the other Pokemon movies. And you have the great atmosphere of this film to thank for that. Even though bullshit magic brings Ash back 2 seconds later and then everyone's memories are wiped so the canon of the show doesn't have to address Ash meaning a literal god of all Pokemon. So in conclusion, while Pokemon the first movie isn't very great, I would say it's worth watching, and it's usually pretty cheap too. Although for some reason I found mine in the birth control aisle.